I
Okay,
said
repeat what you said
yes,
then.
that would be a good thing, but there's
Okay.
other things too that are important. That's the biggest one that I can think of that isn't included in the things that I've been sent. That doesn't mean that, hey, just because you satisfy this condition, all of my preconditions have been met. What I'm saying is that a large portion of the shit that gets sent to me when it's on this topic misses this. So I just plainly ask you, hey, does it include this? And then you make this whole ordeal about me asking the question.
Okay, so Gambit, in good faith, I'm going to ask you, what are all of the like things that you think aren't being covered that ought to be covered before we can discuss this topic?
Okay. I think that if you send me a study that tries to normalize for socioeconomic status, it tries to normalize for entire disciplinary like plan. Like, are they talking before, after? Are they reinforcing? All like we had a whole panel where we laid out the things that we feel are responsible to enact corporal punishment justly. If you send a study that uses a large, like a reasonable portion of all of those things that we mentioned for the last like 3 hours, then that's perfect. I'd be very happy to read through that study, and I'd
Okay,
be probably even okay with the analysis that come out of it. But
okay,
that
what, okay,
isn't
what,
something
okay,
that I've
what's
seen.
what? Okay, so what do you mean? I'm gonna like, I'm just getting a laundry list, and I'm gonna go to bed. I'm gonna send you something in the morning. So, what do you mean when you say entire disciplinary plan?
Yeah, so like so all right, I'm gonna try to cool down. Maybe you didn't listen to the entire panel. We've been talking about this since fucking 10 o'clock. So there's a lot of stuff that's been said. It's possible that you missed all of that. Okay. So we talked about our parents talking to kids outside of giving them corporal punishment. I specifically think that is very unjust. The likelihood that that leads to bad outcomes is very high. So if that type of data set is included when you say all corporal punishment is bad, and
No,
it's
no, no, no,
being,
no, 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 no. I'm
I'm
sorry. I'm
trying to
sorry.
finish. I'm trying
No,
to
no.
finish. I'm
I
trying to
need to
finish.
correct you here because you're misunderstanding my definition, right? The studies I was looking for were talking about spanking specifically. Sorry, that's why I'm
But,
interrupting you. I'm just
but
framing
no,
this
no, no,
this
no, no.
like
But just spanking isn't the important part if you listen to what I'm saying. When they're spanking them, are they talking to them after? Are they talking to them before? Are they reinforcing that this is something that I don't
Bro, this is
want to
an
do, but
unrealistic
your
goal, bro.
actions are driving me to this? What is their disciplinary plan? Just saying a person was spanked is not good enough for me to normalize and say all spankings are bad.
So I'm gonna
it
Because
explain
sounds
what you
like
want.
it.
Hold
Okay,
on. I'm
honestly,
gonna explain
Gabby,
what he
it
wants
sounds
as
like
an
you're moving the
impossibility,
goalposts
bro.
here. So
Yeah, he
it's
is.
not.
Are
It's
you just gonna let this guy blow beer like
Yeah.
this? You're moving the goalposts.
I'm not
Say
saying
Why do you
anything
think
new.
he's moving? Why do you
100%.
think he's moving about goalposts?
because
Yeah.
I can explain why.
first it was socioeconomics isn't the thing that's important and isn't being considered, and then when you show you data that includes that, you're like, well, no. There's other things that need to be included, and then you're giving me this like
I,
He's giving him an
disciplinary
impossible
plan
scenario, bro.
is a term that I've never seen used in like sociological data. That's why I'm like, where does this come from? Like, and I'm trying to
I
understand
don't
like
care
what
what
variable
word
This
you're.
is
you're.
impossibility
No,
what
no,
he's
no.
requesting simply because number one, corporal punishment can't be studied at the moment in majority of countries simply because it's not enacted in the majority of countries. Number one. Number two, to set up a plan, and there's no legislation that has a plan. Corporal punishment is either accepted with some caveats, some minor caveats, but not plans like you need to talk to the child first, you need to engage with them, the psychological effects. There's no such thing. So what he's asking for is a clear impossibility, right? And it's redundant to even ask the question to say I need that for me to change my mind. It doesn't make sense.
Like, okay,
It's a
so
silly thing to say, bro.
I agree with you, but in the spirit of good faith, I'll try to reframe my question and like to try to translate what I'm trying to get out of Gambit. Okay, so Gambit, I am happy like trudging through thousands of like sociology papers to find what you're looking for. What I'm asking you to produce is an operational definition that'll suffice all your criteria, and I'll get back to you with
Yeah,
something that matches those criteria.
yes.
An
So I'm just asking
operational
you to be
definition of
specific
what?
and
You're kinder than me,
definitive.
Canadian.
An
Pardon me?
operational definition of what? What are you looking for a definition here for? What the word corporal punishment means? Or are you looking for a definition of something that you can use in a study? Because Gambit has been consistently making this point. You can try and normalize for socioeconomic factors, and then you might miss another part that's important is, well, they might be poor, but just because they're poor, that doesn't necessarily tell you why they're punishing someone, right?
They're punishing
No, he said
children
how they're
to
punishing.
correct behavior. Like,
Okay,
say,
that's a
Don't let
like
good
you
kid
run it through, bro.
misbehaves.
Don't let him
Usually,
really confuse you.
Oh god.
and this is like coming, like it's like coming from like watching people interact with their kids. It's like, and this is like from the city that I'm from. It's like it's literally when children are acting out, right? Like
But children, that's so broad that could mean literally anything. And as well,
I mean,
what
like
an
a little kid, like
hey,
a little kid.
hey, you good? Okay.
Like,
When
Why
an
are you yelling, bro?
individual,
Why are you
Wait,
yelling?
why
an-
are you even yelling?
Okay, come on. Let me finish. Go ahead.
yeah, when an individual is determining whether or not someone has misbehaved, two people are going to have a different definition of what misbehavior is. One person might enact corporal punishment on a child for an
That
act
doesn't-
that
that's
another
irrelevant.
Oh,
You didn't even give it. You didn't even let him give an example. Like,
Shut up. Whoa. Let him finish, please.
That's not irrelevant at all here, because if you're looking at trying to correct behavior and you're using one method to correct two entirely different patterns of behavior, I assume you would agree with me that the patterns of behavior are going to be relevant when it comes to trying to correct them, right?
No,
Why not?
because you're looking at the mindset of the individual, of the actor and the recipient, and whether or not that form of intervention had positive or negative effects, right? And like this hyper specific, like
Positive and negative are extremely subjective here, because one parent and another parent are both going to use the same method of punishment for two different types of behavior, trying to attain two different end goals of behavior as well.
yeah, and when you do large scale data, you have to do some level of simplification to even have workable data sets, right? That's why these terms are overly broad, because you're looking at thousands of cases, instances, right? You're
That's
not
an
going
issue,
to like,
though, right? Like, you're describing a problem with the data.
Yeah.
do you think it's feasible to do data that specific across thousands of people and
If
come
you
out with
want to
a
make the
set that
claims
like
that
has
you're
like
trying to
actionable
make,
data?
yes.
But hold on,
No, no.
hold on,
If
hold
you
on.
want to make the claim,
Possibilities, bro.
So if we've gotten to the point where we're saying that you need to have this data that, like, I it's not like I don't understand what you guys are saying in terms of this confounding variables, right? Like, I hear you, right? And I hear you saying that complicated situation, but we're at to the point where, like, to prove something like this, we would need impossible data. Like, could we maybe work in the realm of to disprove? Well, to disprove in your sense, right? But like, could we work in the realm of what is possible for this conversation?
I think those things are possible. I think it's absurd to say that they're not. We're not asking for a lot. We're asking for like what like if you're gonna say that there's an infraction that we're gonna call corporal punishment, we're asking for the why did this arise? And what happened around it. Like, is this person being punished for just speaking? Is this person being punished for robbing someone?
I'll give
The
you an example.
severity of the infraction can determine whether or not we feel corporal punishment is just. So when you try to use corporal punish overall to say whether or not it's good or bad, if it's skewed by a bunch of situations that we know are inherently bad, then your conclusion that you arrive at is faulty.
So what I'm trying to explain now is he's trying to turn a qualitative study into a quantitative study, right? He's saying what is instinctively bad. He's trying to outline as though it's a binary option between one is good and one is bad. That's not how it works. Because it's qualitative, sorry. You need to recognize
Is
that
it
the questions
quantitative or
people are asked-
qualitative?
qualitative, because people are being asked questions, right? About do you feel like it was justified you being struck? These are the type of questions people are asked. So these are questions that are included in some studies. Did the person, the recipient, feel that there was a just beating? It doesn't go into specifics of why it happened, because that's not realistic, right? And these studies do exist, and they show long-term effects of children having negative effects on them, right? Including aggression, like I mentioned, including mental health issues, as I mentioned, including alcohol issues, as I mentioned, and dependency issues, as I mentioned, spousal abuse, as I mentioned, and all of these things are shown. Sorry?
Yeah, you just said I mentioned like 50 times. That's stupid
Yeah,
shit,
no.
right?
I'm hitting home. I'm hitting home because I'm coming for your juggler, bro. So
We're
I'm
not.
hitting home.
You're not coming for anyone's
finish.
jugular.
Let Leon finish, please.
Yeah. So as I was saying, just to bring the point home, very simply, all of these things that you're requesting are already out there. Because you haven't done the research, right? I don't mind sending you literature also. I'll join the bandwagon of Canadian, and I'll also send you literature that will show you an outline, people who felt unjust in the beatings they received and the negative outcomes thereafter. Thank you.
Okay. we get it. You're trying to like pump up rhetoric right now. I did research, bro. If you remember the 20 minutes ago when I said at the very start, I agree that this research exists. I'm willing to accept its validity. However, I don't think that it's appropriate research to try and tell parents, hey, you are unable and illegal to do a form of corporal punishment, or tell a school something similar, okay? It's always going to be way too individualistic. There's going to be 10,000 different factors that are there's going to be 10,000 factors that are going to be overlapping with each other. And whether or not someone individually feels like corporate punishment was justified on them, they might have a very different perspective to what the rest of society deems. So an individual who got given corporal punishment because they like robbed a grandma who was walking down the road with her shopping, you might ask them, hey, do you feel like the corporal punishment you got was justified? And they'd be like, fuck no, man, I got bullied so hard. I'd be like, well, hang on a second. I actually think it's a good thing that you feel bad about the case that was given to you, as long as it makes you less likely to go ahead and commit this act that's a negative towards society. I don't care whether you as an individual feel like it was justified.
So in the long-term effects, when they become drug dependent, or they beat on their spouse, or they become more aggressive in society, that's an acceptable thing to stop a child from maybe stealing from a school.
You're laying out a dichotomy where removal of corporal punishment would mean that those things didn't happen. No, that's what I'm telling you what your hypothetical is.
It's
Your
not
hypothetical
it's not a hypothetical.
You just
Like,
said
the
it was hypothetical.
the research does show that
research is there.
children who are like recipients of corporal punishment are more aggressive. So, like, if you're trying to have kids that aren't violent,
Yes.
beating up old grannies, hitting them is the wrong way to go about this.
Canadian caller.
What's up?
I mean, I'm gonna try to reach you. I promise. You know, I'm gonna try to engage with them differently. Okay.
Is that
Do you agree, bro? Do you agree, Canadian caller, that it could be possible that there's a confounding variable that is causing them to be aggressive that is not the corporal punishment, and that confounding variable could be more influential, meaning that their resulting behavior could be the same irregardless of whether or not they received corporal punishment? Do you agree that that's within the realm of possibility?
It's insane you're bringing it up. Anything is
Wait, can you give me a yes no though?
Anything is possible.
Can you give me a yes no?
Because I feel like I feel like you're using these bullshit hypothetical questions to try to like get some kind of leeway.
No, I'm not. No.
This is untrue.
No. If you gave me a simple yes no,
it is possible that someone could be innately violent. Of course, Gambit.
Okay, that's not what I was asking you. The reason why I was asking you the question is so that you understand why we think the methodology is important. If you think it's possible that there are confounding variables that could cause the behavior that aren't corporal punishment, the reason why we might look at your study and want to understand the disciplinary plan, why they did it, all of that stuff, that's why, because those things are confounding variables that could be bigger than the corporal punishment that was enacted, meaning that you could have had the same behavior without the corporal punishment. This is why methodology is important.
Do you know what a p-value is?
Yes. Listen to this motherfucker. Do you know what a TIFF is?
Let me break it down quickly for anybody who's listening who might not know. So the p-value in scientific research is when you look at two things in a null hypothesis to see if there's a link between the variables, right? And that's what they did in this research. And they found a link between people who were struck as children, and the link is very clear that there's a probability. There's a connection.
I don't know. So why are you repeating this?
Why is he talking about other variables, right? Why is he talking about other variables?
Wait, Dark Black Lion. You agree that
there's an association found between striking your child and them having, for example, aggressive nature or aggressive.
So Dark Black Lion, you're doing a repeat tech. You're doing a repeat tech. We get you. Okay, this is no. Hold on. I want to ask you a simple question.
I'm explaining it to you again.
Yes, I do think you're dumb, and that's why I'm trying to ask you this question. I want to have faith in you.
I
want to have faith. I want to have faith that you're not some dumb ideologue. So let me ask you a question. So do you think that you can arrive at a p-value, and if you're missing a confounding variable, the resulting prescriptions that you make could be wrong? Do you understand that you can plug in a formula and get a p-value, and if you're missing a confounding variable, all of your prescriptions are wrong? This is why we're asking about methodology. You keep wanting to talk about the results of studies.
Okay. So what were you trying to say, Lion? And then I'm
he interrupted me.
Move it. No,
I heard you.
So I want. Hold on. I want a line to finish up that point. I want to start maybe moving away from this fighting over studies, right? Because I don't think we're going to get any aware of this, but like Lion or Leon, but whatever. Goddamn, go.
Thank you, bro. So, really quickly, when it comes to a null hypothesis study, right, there's a set number of variables that are being looked at, right? And those variables, they're looking at the correlation between those variables, nothing else. Nothing
Yeah,
else. So what you're saying
move
is a
on from
moot
the study.
point
It's
because
cool.
you
I
clearly
get it.
don't understand how a null
Here we go.
hypothesis
No, you
works.
clearly
So
are
because of
lost.
that,
It doesn't matter.
because of
Who
that,
cares?
because of
Move
that, hold on,
on.
let me finish.
Move
Let me
on.
finish.
Let
Respectfully,
him
respectfully.
finish.
Because of that, what you're saying, number one, I apparently was stupid, but you don't understand the basics of what meta research is,
You don't
what a null
understand
hypothesis is.
statistics.
And number two,
Okay,
when it comes to the research, you guys are preaching all of this stuff, but it's all anecdotal and it's all subjective. None of you guys are citing any papers. None
Bro,
of you guys
your
are
study
looking at any
cites
research.
anecdotes.
So
Why did you
please,
just
please,
say
please
that?
come at me with
Your
actual.
study is people's
actual
feelings. I can't believe it.
Whoa, Lion wasn't done.
Yeah, I'm done. Let them go. Let them go. They seem emotional, so let them go.
Okay, Dark. I kind of.
He
Well,
just
Dark
claims
Lion.
stuff and thinks it's true. That's
I mean,
hilarious.
like,
Okay,
it's
Vanilla-
amazing to me.
Vanilla?
Oh, Vanilla too. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so I kind of want to move past too, but Dark Lion, what they're saying is, if you had a study that looked at people that eat chocolate and people that are overweight, and there was this huge p-value that correlated the two, you'd be like, oh, eating chocolate causes people to be overweight. But if there was this outside factor that said, hey, overweight people eat more chocolate, outside of that, that changes the conclusion that you would get to. So you can't just look at those two factors in the p-value. I don't want to keep going into this. I kind of want to get back
Yeah.
to
So Vanilla, you understand why methodology is important, and you can't just look at results and assume that just because this is an organized study that they accounted for all relevant confounding variables. Because guess what, Vanilla, you're an intelligent person, so you can
You don't
understand that.
Understand
Some
the
people
difference
aren't though.
between an individual study and
The
an overall system of many studies.
the problem is when we like I'm a very big advocate of free speech. So I love what Prime does. But Prime also talks about some of the dangers. And what you can get is, since this is an open panel, people with very low IQ, like if we were looking at the p-value of the IQ of people that join, it would be very low. And the unfortunate reality is we
That's
have
not
to
how
interact with these people
P-value
as well.
of people who join. Do you even know what that means? Do you know what you're saying?
No.
You're out
If we
yourself.
if we
You're
if we
out
looked
yourself.
if we looked at the outcomes, and we tried to do a normal
Still
distribution
wrong.
of the IQ value of people like you
This
that
guy's
join
just
this
saying
panel.
words he can't spell.
P,
Say what?
P is an
What?
indicator
Are
of
we on the
probability.
playground right now? What is
P
happening?
is
Oh,
again.
I don't know,
we got-
bro.
we got,
Like, I didn't even get to finish my point. Somebody fucking
no.
shouted over me.
Okay,
Like,
okay,
okay, okay.
P-values are like
Shut
the
up.
prom-
Whoa,
approximation
whoa,
of,
whoa,
like,
whoa, whoa, whoa.
probabilities.
No, Canadian Call, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't, when I say stop, stop. Okay, so Lion, just letting you know, Gigi the Grey gifted $10, which means for 10 minutes you'll be muted, but you'll be back in 10
Oh,
Oh,
minutes.
that's brilliant.
Mashallah.
Okay, I'll be
Yeah. Okay.
Mashallah.
Okay.
Praise whoever did that.
All right. So Canadian caller, you can finish your point, and I want to hear from Yamato. Apparently, they didn't get to finish their point. I want to make sure they get to be heard.
Okay, so a p-value is like a probabilistic weight. So, like 95% is this true, and then the p-value calculates that. So, yes, there's like a margin of error where what is being evaluated could be untrue, but it's incredibly low again.
Okay,
Wait,
go ahead.
I
You
feel
think-
like
Well, let's
You think
try to
that
move away from this.
regardless of the
Let's
study-
try to move
I wanna
away from
move
this
us
Regardless
study.
of the study that you can, regardless of the study that you can conduct, you think that just because you can cite a margin of error, that margin of error is true. You don't think you can be missing confounding variables, which blows the whole experiment up. This is why they refute studies. Like, what are y'all saying?
like the study shit
No, let's
is
move-
getting
let's move
really
on.
dead
No,
right now. Okay,
let's move on.
We
because
we,
we
we
don't
don't
have the
just
time
have to
teach
look
someone
about the
stats class,
studies
because we're not talking
right?
about studies. We're talking about studies on studies. We're talking about
Yeah,
thousands of different
exactly.
data points that are being looked at to come to these conclusions, not an individual study with one p-value.
Okay, all right, okay,
So-
moving on. Oh, sorry, we got to move on
And
past this.
morality.
Yamato, please.
Okay, so before I was fucking interrupted by some idiot screaming over me, right? I was gonna say, like, there are like instances where children act out, right? And they act out in stores, and parents like they do like discipline their kids in the store and stuff like that. These are things that happen like in the real world. right? Like will parents like fucking discipline their kids in front of people? And this idea that like we could just tell any parent not to fucking discipline their child or what to do is stupid because most parents will tell you to mind the fucking business and this is their kid. So yeah, like fuck, Jesus Christ.
Okay. So Uni? Yeah, Uni. Hi.
Yeah, I just think.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, go on. Oh yeah, I wanted to talk about
scared. I thought you were going to say somebody muted him. I was like, no.
I was ready for it. Look, what the morality of the issue of like corporal punishment is, it's interesting and important regardless of like the statistics and the data. So I think we might be able to talk about that. I don't think that it's wrong for a parent to be able to decide how they should punish their child, right? If you are seeing your child who you know best and you think you're like, as long as you're using good intention to like fuel your behavior, I think whatever you're doing is probably going to end up okay. If your child is hitting other people and then you hit your child to be like, hey, guess what? When you get hit, it hurts. And that sucks and you don't want it to keep going on. I think this is like probably going to end up being a good thing, right? The act of hitting someone in itself isn't necessarily bad, but it's the intention that comes along with it and like somewhat the effect afterwards. But as long as you're like placing a correlation in a child's head that doing the wrong thing is going to lead to negative consequences for you, I think that's probably going to end up being better overall.
Okay, so Uni, this is my problem with your take. It seems like when you hit kids, they become more violent. So if your goal is to reduce like the violent behavior that your children is enacting in, it seems like hitting them is not a good way to go about that.
So you're saying like it's counterintuitive, right? But we already just went over for like an hour why like sometimes that's true, sometimes that's not true. So let's just talk about like that act in itself, irregardless of the consequence. If you're instilling in a child's mind that committing an act of violence is going to lead to a negative consequence for you, this seems like it's going to be a good thing for someone to have done. Unless you want to say hitting someone is never right, like
it's never wise to make like totalistic statements about anything, and it feels like you're like couching on that to get some wiggle room. So you know what? I'll just ask very bluntly. What would I need to provide to you in order for you to like be convinced that it's not a good idea to hit your kids?
Well, nothing, because sometimes it will be a bad idea to hit your kids. Sometimes it will be a good idea to hit your kids, right? I feel like what you would have to provide to me is evidence that someone is hitting their child with the intent to cause harm and not the intent to educate, right? That is when I think it becomes sadistic, and at that point, you've got a parent who's enacting child abuse. Child abuse, I feel like, is a very thing that requires intent, right? That's why we differentiate between abuse and neglect. If you're abusing your child, that means you're doing with intent, you're probably sadistic, and you're probably someone who's a horrible person. However, if you're neglecting your child, that like comes with like a whole bunch of different groups of categories of like why this might be happening and how we should deal with that. If you're someone who's like punching a child in the face, who's just brought them like an A+ on a piece of homework, and they're like, hey dad, like I finally did something that I hope you could be proud of, and you hit the kids because they're annoying you and you're just trying to hurt them so they leave you alone, that's abuse. But in another situation where you're using goodwill and good intent to be able to like achieve some good consequence for the child, that's when I'm okay with it.
Do you think that like from the child's perspective, they see it that way?
I don't think like couching on a child's perspective is like the most important thing when it comes to like determining the act of a parent, right? The child's perspective is going to be mixed by like a billion different things, obviously, right? If a child has the perspective that they don't fully understand why they're being hit for whatever reason, that's going to lead to complications. But a child, like just by the function of their capacity of brain, is always going to have like a guideline and a mixed understanding of what's happening in the world around them. That's why I push back really hard when people are like, dude, you know your toddler, just like sit down with them and like go over some meta-analysis about like why child abuse is bad, and like explain to them like the chemical reactions as to what happens when you light a match and you put it on your finger. Like, okay. They're not going to understand any of that shit. They're literally incapable of it.
All right, so when you engage in corrective behaviors of hitting your kids, right, are you not at all concerned that like you're teaching your kids that like an appropriate way to deal with people who are behaving in a way they don't like is to hit them?
Hey, I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing, depending on what they're like internalizing as bad things to do. So if I raise a child who sees one child bullying another child, and they're like, okay, I was raised with the idea that like violence can can solve some issues, I would be proud of my child if they walked up to a bully and socked him in the face. And then there was the other kid who was like not able to defend themselves, right? I'd be totally fine with that, even though you're describing a child who's been like trained to engage in violence. Well, hang on a second. Violence can absolutely be justified in a situation where there's a person doing wrong who can be stopped by violence.
But you just like okay. So did I misinterpret you, or did you just say that like a kid's not going to fully understand why you're like administering the violence?
Yeah, probably not. It depends on the age, right? So kid can mean like a million things here. So if you've got like a 4-year-old who you like spank with a spatula if they like try and steal from you or swear or like be aggressive to other kids or whatever, if by the time they're like 12 years old, you're not really hitting them anymore because they have a better understanding of the world and you've explained to them what is right and what is wrong. If they revert back to their youngest years and see what a wrong thing is and respond with it in violence, in some cases that is going to be absolutely justified. And even then, you'll be able to teach them from a learning experience like, hey, in this situation, you responded with violence. That was not justified for this reason, or it was justified for this reason. And they're going to be able to understand it a lot better at that older age.
Okay. And
Yes.
like when they go into schools that have like zero violence policies, like you think that this is like a preferable state to have your kid in? Where like they're willing to roll the dice on violence?
I think like a school with a zero violence policy, I mean, the idea is hilarious to me because you can have the idea of a school with a zero violence policy. That is not going to happen, right?
Oh, sorry. I misspoke. Zero tolerance for violence policy.
Yeah, as in literally no violence. Yeah, sure. Your school is probably going to be beneficial, and this is where like the gap between law and like home works. It's like it's probably beneficial for a school to like if violence ever happens, they just punish both sides of it. That's what the school's job is to do. But as soon as you get home, you can be like, hey, look, the reason that the school does this is because they can't let things boil out of control and like allow people to have their own subjective understanding of like vindictive justice and them agree with that. You would just be like, look, at school you got in trouble, but as soon as you come home, I'll tell you why you did the right thing. So in the school setting, yeah, sure, have a zero tolerancy policy towards violence, but you can only really get punished at school, right? As soon as you come home, I'll like give you $10 for like punching the bully in the face or whatever. That behavior is something that I'm okay with rewarding and incentivizing.
Okay, and I want to make sure I understand your position correctly. You think it's preferable to like hit your kids, explain to them the nuance of whether or not to hit kids at school and stuff like that, as opposed to just not hitting your kids. This is your position?
Well, it depends on the situation, right? Like if I've got a child who is bullying other children, and say if my child is bullying other children, I'm going to show them what it's like to get bullied so they understand the negative consequence of that. They aren't going to be able to conceptualize why bullying is a negative and bad thing. If they were able to conceptualize that, they probably wouldn't be doing it right now. So in that case, I'd be like, look, maybe we have to bully this kid to show them what bullying is so they can get a taste of their own medicine.
Jesus Christ.
You can say Jesus Christ. You're not really posing an argument.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
Very simple question, Unity. Do you feel like hitting an animal is wrong, for example?
No, are you stupid? If I've got a dog that's biting at my ankles, I'm gonna bop it on its nose so it stops biting me. I can't explain to it.
I'm not talking about self-defense. I'm talking about corrective behavior. Your dog drops something.
Yeah, that is corrective behavior.
Okay, so you hit your dog. Okay, so number one, that's considered animal cruelty, right?
It's not. Wait, are you joking?
Under legislation, I've just looked up the meaning, right? The definition is animal cruelty involves gratuitously, inflicting
gratuitously.
harm.
This guy's saying words he doesn't even know how to say. Ironic. Go on.
Yeah, but basically, if you strike an animal, right, depending on the severity of the strike, it can be considered illegal, correct?
Yeah, no shit. You can't just like punch your dog in the face when it walks past you, right?
So at what level do you say that the harm inflicted to an animal is appropriate? And I'm about to circle back to children, don't worry.
Yeah, sure, go ahead. I think if you've got a dog who is like biting other dogs or like shitting in the house, and the only way to stop your dog from shitting in the house is to bop it on the nose so that it has a negative association between shitting in the house and getting hurt, yeah, I'm totally fine with that. I've no issue.
So this is what I mean about this, the lazy man solution, right? So he, in his own words, just said the only solution is to hit the dog, as it will
Said
make
if.
an association between the two. If you speak to dog animal experts, they never condone striking a dog. Never. Why? They're experts in their
They're
field
vegans.
and they know alternative methods to resolving the issue. Now, when you're speaking about children and striking children, it's the same mentality.
It's not.
Experts in the field, let me finish, Rini. Experts in the field never, ever. You speak to any psychologist, therapist, anyone within the field of psychology or understanding of the way the human mind develops or grows or expands with knowledge, right? They will never impose striking a child. They will never consider striking a child. The same way an animal expert will never consider striking an animal. There are alternatives. Simply because you do not know them does not mean they do not exist.
Sure.
Right?
If an animal expert is telling me, hey, you're not allowed to hit your dog because it's better to like put it in puppy school for like 11 months, and then after this 11 months it'll get a little badge that says I don't shit on the floor anymore. I'm sorry. I would rather just like slap my dog in the face and be like, hey, stop shitting on the floor, and give it that
What you
negative
get now is
connotation.
you're creating an example, right? A scenario where you have to send your dog away for 11 months. What about if he told you, try this technique, it might work for you, instead of hitting your dog? Do you prefer to hit your dog, which then makes it cool, or do you
What are
prefer
you
to actually
implying
solve
here?
this
So
issue?
firstly, you've already accused me of animal abuse, so
No,
that's
no,
pretty
no. I'm
funny.
not accusing you of
The-
animal abuse.
the-
at all.
you did,
Look,
okay.
I don't even need to redact it because I never said it. I'm not even accusing you of animal abuse.
Sure,
Answer the
whatever.
question.
I'm not
The
asking you to
question is very
redact it.
straightforward. The question is very straightforward.
Okay, so am I just like
Would you
preferring
prefer
to hit?
the animal, or if the
I'm saying it.
and it's
I'm
the
saying
same applies to children. Or would
God.
you prefer to hit the
Do you want the
animal
answer?
or the
Yeah.
He's
child?
not gonna let you
Or
answer.
if
He's
it's
just
a
gonna
better
keep repeating.
alternative?
It's the
Go ahead,
repeat
go
tech.
ahead,
He
go ahead.
doesn't know what to do.
Yeah, go
He's
ahead.
like if you go into programming, like when shit runs into like positive feedback loop and like an infinite loop, that's what he's doing. He's like, oh shit, I don't know what to do. Like he's not saying my answer, so I'm just repeat this shit 30 times.
Yeah.
Then he'll eventually say what
What
I
he
say.
said
It's
is,
I-
you didn't answer the
hilarious.
question at all, though.
Hold
You
on.
didn't answer-
Okay. Let Uni get a chance.
Thanks, Prime. So, if you give me two options, one where I have to hit the dog, and another where I explain to the dog by barking in its own language the right
I
or
didn't say
wrong thing to do,
that.
I would
No,
probably.
let finish.
That's bad faith, bro. That's just bad faith.
Let him finish, and then you can respond to
Thank
it.
you. So, yeah, if I have to choose between a violent and non-violent act, and they're both going to lead to the same consequence, and the non-violent one is easier for me to do and inflicts less damage to the dog, yeah, I'll probably take the non-violent one. But that's a false dichotomy. This doesn't exist. You're going to have one method which is easier, more effective, and takes less time. I'll just choose that one, whether it's violent or non-violent.
Oh, okay. Derek, do you mind if I circle back?
Go jump in, bro.
All right. Okay. So, Uni, in our little interaction a couple minutes ago, you said you would hit your kids and then you tell them like when it's good to hit people, when it's not good to hit people, right? Like, am I remembering your words correctly?
Yeah, you should probably explain to a child when violence is and isn't justified.
Okay. So if you could like, if you can correct your child's behavior through just talking to them, why is the violence necessary?
Because you can't, right? There are some circumstances where it will be possible to correct a child's behavior through violence and through non-violence, all right? The example that you're giving is like, okay, yeah, we can just like talk to somebody and like change their behavior. The dichotomy that I'm giving you here is you have a younger child, like 4 years old, 5 years old, or whatever. That is someone who you probably don't actually benefit anything from like slapping them or hitting them or anything like that, yeah? Because even if you do hit them or don't hit them, they probably don't understand the difference, right? But when it's an older person, you'll be able to explain to them properly what's going on, and if you can explain to them properly, you don't need to hit them, right? That's the example you're giving?
Yeah, that's the question I'm asking you.
Well, what's the question there?
No, yeah,
Like,
no.
why do you need to hit someone in that case? So if that's the case, why you need to hit someone? Yeah, sure. So there are some times where so for the child's safety, I think someone before gave the example of like a lit match, right? In some examples, it's going to be faster, more efficient, and necessary to engage in some sort of physical action to stop your child because they won't be able to understand it. So if I've got a kid, who's about to like I don't know, poke a dog in the eyeball or something, right? If I'm trying to yell at them, hey kid, stop going to poke the dog in the eye. If I've to like slap them on the hand or like slap them on the ass or some shit so they don't go forward and do this action, that's fine. As long as it like immediately stops the behavior, and then I can maybe explain to them afterwards a little bit. We've gotten to like a short-term solution here where the negative action has stopped, and it wouldn't have stopped without some sort of physical intervention.
Wait, but if
okay, but even if-
if you're that close to them where you can hit them, why can't you just take the match out their hand?
Because you might not have time to do it, right? Like if you
Wait, but you have time. You have time to hit them.
do you think it's safer to use your hand with an unpredictable child moving a match around? Think it's safer to just like lick your fingers and snuff the flame out on the match, or just hit the match out of their hand?
What are you talking about? Punishment? Or are you talking about? Because I don't think people, even people who are against corporal punishment, would say, "Hey, if someone had some fire in their hand, to hit the fire out of their hand, you're not punishing the person. You're hitting the fire out of their hand. That's different from you were playing with matches. Now I'm going to spank you, so you learn not to play with matches." That's what
Yeah,
I'm saying.
it's a good point. There's a difference there, and I guess I'm kind of overall coming around to like there's times and there's an age period where you're kind of in the middle between they can understand some concepts through explanation and some concepts they can't understand through explanation. And I guess it's about like how you're choosing to involve some sort of negative reinforcement for bad behavior. It's going to be different on the individual child as well. We can't really give like a hypothetical child as any example because you're going to be looking at like 1,000 different people where it's like, one person might, respond well and correctly to an explanation as to why their bad behavior is wrong. Another child might hear that and might be like, hey, Lamau, I literally don't care what you're saying to me. And for them, to get them to stop the behavior, you might just have to like put enough negative reinforcement so that they don't do it at the time. And then you hope that they just eventually grow out of whatever negative behavior.
Yeah, so this is why we get stuck on like corporal punishment, because negative reinforcement could come in the case of grounding them or taking away their phone or taking away television. So there are many other types of negative reinforcement that could be done to teach this child a lesson. Why does physical violence need to be part?
The younger you go, the less likely you have those type of options.
Yeah, and as well, like, but at the same time, there is like, it's a gray area, obviously. Because if you go too young, well, then hitting them, they're literally not going to get anything from it, right? Obviously.
100%.
But then if you go too old, if you hit them, they might start swinging back, and then you're not in any good position, right? Look, I think you guys made some good points. Once we stop talking about those garbage, useless studies that none of you understand at all, right? Crazy how that works. Now that we've gone past that, we have reached like a good moral position of like, there's some instances where the subjectivity of the individual is going to influence your ability to accurately determine whether or not corporate punishment is justified. For one individual, it may be justified. The same behavior enacted by another individual, it may not be justified. You're always just going to have to like appeal to the person who knows the most about the situation.
So just to reply to that quickly in regards to the studies, similarly as flat earthers, anti-vaxxers and everyone else, they disregard studies. That's not something that we're going to promote going forward. So we're going to stick to the studies as much as we can and hold them on
Believe
our
all studies. Go tweet believe all studies.
Dark Black Line. I can't believe you brought us back to the studies. The study that you were talking about, where like we're talking about different anecdotes of like how someone individually feels about their corporate punishment, that is literally the equivalent to VAERS, where people self-report their fucking vaccination history. Okay?
It's a very simple question. Did you feel it was justified when you were struck? It's not how did you feel.
After you got your vaccine, did you feel like your chest got tighter, and you started feeling more sick?
No, not at all.
Oh, interesting. Well, what if I went to VAERS and asked all the people there, and they said, "Yo, after I got my vaccine,
anti-vaccine conversation, but I'll have it with you if you want, bro."
No. He's just using us as an example. He's just using.
He doesn't understand.
VAERS isn't a study; it's a self-report.
They're conflating studies with self-reporting, but
no. They're saying that it's like of that quality. That's what he's trying to say.
Oh, fair enough. I didn't actually post my study, so it's ironic that he says that. So he doesn't have the literature on hand, but he knows what kind of study it is. I find that
It's
interesting.
all good. It's all good, brother. You'll get
Oh,
there
you're
one
asking
day.
yourself, bro. I'm just listening to you and
He
laughing. bro.
doesn't understand that he's advocating for self-report to be
I
a
believe in the scientific
component
method,
of the
bro.
study. He
No,
doesn't
it's called a
understand this.
qualitative analysis, bro. If you don't know what that means, look it up. I don't have the time
Bro,
or the
bro,
crayon to
you
explain it.
don't, you're literally saying words that show you don't know what it means.
Okay. All right.
Anyway, this is fun.
So
I gotta go.
let's pull back. Let's pull back. Because I'm not sure how much farther we can get here.